Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. On Sunday, looking at Isaiah chapter 47, verses 8 to 15, we looked at God predicting the doom of proud Babylon. And we looked at the things that they took pride in, the things that caused them to think they didn't need God, and in fact made them think of themselves as God. And those things were their wealth, their knowledge, and their power. And when discussing the fact that their knowledge and wisdom doesn't provide the safety that they thought it provided, it wouldn't provide the refuge that they were hoping it would, I discussed, on the one hand, the Babylonian astrology and the magic that was related to that, the way that they would look in the stars and try to predict the future and everything. And I connected that in some uses, in some of the ways science is used in our society today, in our modern world. And this is a connection we might not readily make, but they both have to do, as I said, with having special insight into the real workings of the world, kind of a hidden knowledge that enables you to manipulate nature on some really profound levels. And I did say, look, science itself can be very good. It can be very legitimate. It can be very useful. Because science at its heart, what it is observing the natural world that God's made, observing patterns, better understanding the mechanisms of how it works, and then living our lives accordingly, living in harmony with how nature works. But I talked about, and this is really the heart of all of what Babylon did wrong, is a godless abuse of this kind of knowledge. And I didn't use this term, but it really is a good term for what I'm describing, and it's called scientism. And many people have pointed out, well, what does scientism mean? Scientism is viewing science, the study of the material world, as the answer to either all that exists or all that's important. So it's science saying, what can we know about the natural world, and the assumption that this is all there really is to know. And as I said on Sunday, there's a big difference between saying, we have learned some things about how the natural world works, and saying we have learned some things about how the natural world works, and the natural world is all that there is. I want you to imagine a cake. And looking at a cake, most of the cake is cake. It's the bready cake material. And on top, there's a layer of icing. And if you think about it, it's analogous maybe to this idea of if everyone agrees we can learn and observe things about the natural world. If we were to make that layer of icing the natural world and say, okay, this is, on the one hand, if you were to say scientism, this is all there is, and we were able to penetrate maybe halfway through and learn maybe half of all there is in the natural world to know, this means we know half of everything. And so this attitude would make us think, wow, we're really smart. This causes us to puff ourselves up and to think we have figured out so much relative to all there is. But what we may not realize is that there's this whole cake of what we could say is immaterial reality that isn't natural and material that underlies that icing. And with a Christian worldview, we can understand there's so much that can't be measured with any kind of empirical observation. For one thing, the human soul, even just starting with us. There's so much about us that isn't just a matter of physical nature. Then we have things like angels and demons, other created things that are still immaterial that can't be fathomed by definition by a scientific process. And then you look at God himself. His own nature, of course, is infinite in depth. None can comprehend God. And we'll spend all eternity in heaven better and better, growing into the depths of knowing God, and we still won't even come close to comprehending, meaning fully understanding and fathoming who he is. And so think of the cake, maybe even, and it breaks down because God is infinite. It could be of infinite depth if we're thinking of God himself. But the cake, the rest of the cake is all the things that science can't even learn by definition. When we view the world that way, we can look at the same amount of scientific observations and say, wow, it's great, we've learned some things, but look how much depth there is underlying the material world that we will never be able to fathom. There are certain things God has revealed to us about the human soul, about angels and demons, and certainly about his own nature, about his own self. We should believe what he said. We should be grateful for the insight he's given us into the reality that we can't see or touch or measure. But this whole thing, living with a sense of God, with a theistic worldview that says there's this transcendent God who made everything, who keeps nature running, who guides history, and who has hidden depths that we can never experience and has revealed himself to us in profound and meaningful and real ways. This is deeply humbling. And you can just see the contrast between these two attitudes. And we see if nature is all there is, you end up with this Babylon-like pride of kind of saying, we're basically God. We can manipulate nature and nature is all there is. We're basically God. And it turns science and scientists into a kind of priesthood. And sadly, as our society secularizes, we're seeing that happen with science. It gets held up with a kind of priest-like finality, that expertise, scientific expertise is kind of the end of the conversation, as opposed to a kind of a more rounded out and intellectually humble approach, which says, yes, what we can observe and measure materially is important. And as Christians, we need to be quick to acknowledge that we're not anti-intellectual, we're not anti-reality. But by the same token, we just understand there's so much more depth to reality than what science by definition can ever access, that it will just humble us in that approach and in that pursuit. I worked in the scientific field for 10 years before becoming a pastor on staff. Many of you know that I worked in the environmental field, and I was just stunned in trying to understand and characterize how water moves through the ground. It seems like such a simple thing, but the infinite complexity in environmental science, and we were trying to model and capture, trying to quantify how is this happening in a particular place, and we all knew we were only able to capture the tiniest fraction of all the complexity of what was happening, even in nature, which is humbling enough in itself, and let alone that which we can't see and measure at all. So a godly and humble approach to nature, we can everywhere find things that declare God's praise and learn about them and study them, but all of it goes back to there's this huge God that thought of all this, that upholds all this, and we're just seeing his handiwork. It's a whole different approach to the pride that we see condemned in Isaiah 47. Regarding Sunday, we have our gatherings at 10 a.m. for morning service. Again, no equipping hour. And we have our evening service at 5 p.m. Jason Kenny will be preaching in the morning. Greg, this will be his last Sunday away on his vacation. I will actually be away this Sunday, so we've got Jason Kenny preaching, serving us well. And we have, again, evening service. That'll be a time of hearing a devotional, hearing a testimony, and spending some time in prayer together. So, though I won't be there, I'll miss you very much. And Lord willing, it'll be a great time of blessing for you all. All right, talk to you later. Bye-bye.